when you look to who can vote, it is critical that you know what pieces of legislation guide the voting process and give persons the right to vote. Now, the right to vote is a fundamental cornerstone in any democracy. Um, we have the National Assembly Elections Act, which outlines certain rights, and it also indicates the criteria to be met in terms of who can vote. Now, a citizen of St. Kitts and Nevis who is 18 years or older is qualified to vote. That person should be ordinarily resident within St. Kitts and Nevis. Another person who can register or who can qualify to vote is a citizen of St. Kitts and Nevis who is also 18 years or older, who is not ordinarily resident in St. Christopher and Nevis, but domiciled in St. Christopher and Nevis. So that person can be overseas, having acquired citizenship, whether by birth or descent, or some other form, maybe marriage. And once that person is 18 years old and is domiciled within the Federation of St. Christopher and Nevis, that person can also vote.
Now, Natasha, before you go any further, could you help explain the differences between the terms ordinarily resident and domiciled?
Now, ordinarily resident is, in layman's term, where you live, where your habitation exists. So if you're from Birdwalk, you live there, you sleep there every night, your meals go there, you grew up there with your parents, that person, you would be considered as ordinarily domiciled. Sorry, ordinarily resident.
Mm-hmm.
Now, domiciled is if, for instance, you were living in St. Paul's and you decided to go overseas to live. Maybe you went initially to study, and then you decided, okay, well, I'll stay in America. I'm not coming back. But your roots are in St. Paul's. You grew up in St. Paul's. You knew, basically, your whole childhood, your entire life is grounded and rooted in St. Paul's, and that is where you're domiciled.
Okay.
Your parents are there, your siblings are there, and so you would have some sort of connection to that particular area. The law allows persons who are ordinarily resident overseas but domiciled to a particular area to register in that particular area.
Okay. So you can be a citizen once you're 18 and resident here, or a citizen over 18 and domiciled in St. Kitts and Nevis, but you are so in layman's terms, and we've heard this conversation a lot for the last week about the people who live overseas, the overseas voters, and whether or not they have a right. Is it a legal right for them to vote in the election?
Based on our laws, yes. Once you qualify, you meet the necessary criteria as per the legislation.
Mm-hmm.
You have that right to vote, that legal right to vote.
Mm-hmm.
And so, moving on from that right, if your name is on a list of registered persons for a particular constituency, anyone who's on that particular list can vote in an election. That also includes our Commonwealth citizens.
Yes.
Once they have been ordinarily resident in St. Christopher and Nevis for 12 months continuously prior to their registration.
Okay. Gav, you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that the right to vote is effectively a constitutional right. And I wanted to read from the case of that Premier Brantley had brought in Nevis in relation to the electoral issues that he had there when he originally lost the seat and then won in re-election. The court said that the constitutional right is conferred by the Constitution is twofold. The first is the basic right to be registered as a voter in the appropriate constituency. That basic right is granted to every Commonwealth citizen of the age of 18 years or upwards if he or she possesses the prescribed qualifications relating to residence or domicile, as Natasha was saying, and is not disqualified by Parliament from the registration as a voter. The second is the concomitant right to vote in the appropriate constituency. The concomitant right is granted to every citizen who is entitled to that basic right. That right is a right to vote in accordance with the provisions of any law in that behalf. This means that although the manner of voting is statutory or customary, the right to vote is inherently constitutional. I think that's very important because in our fundamental right sections of the Constitution, the right to vote is not there. It doesn't mean that the right to vote is not constitutional. It might not be a fundamental right, but it definitely is a constitutional right. And the court has said the vote of each and every citizen is a badge of dignity and of personhood. However, in our laws, it gives the Parliament the power to determine how a person can register to vote. And that is why this overseas voter issue comes into play, because clearly there are some people who can physically live outside of St. Kitts, but domicile is really where your permanent connection is, your intent to come home. And in St. Kitts and Nevis, because of our large diaspora, I can find very little people that don't have family members that grew up in St. Kitts or Nevis that live abroad. Almost every family has an uncle, an aunt, a cousin, a brother, sister, daughter, son that lives abroad, but they might spend their whole days listening to Win FM because their connection to the country is so strong.
They usually listen to the media more than people who live here, actually. Exactly. So, but there's a lot of people who are not in favor of that. People who believe that, you have already taken up residence somewhere else, you've registered to vote somewhere else, you come home once every 2 years for a carnival or a funeral or a wedding or something like that. And is it fear? I would be interested to know how the panelists feel. Do you believe it's fear that those persons who may not really have a full grasp of what's happening locally because they're not experiencing it firsthand, is it fear that they have an equal right to vote as the persons who are ordinarily resident here?
Well, I want to jump in here. For me, I'll use some of my personal experience. So I would have lived abroad for about 6 years, and I just returned last year. And for my graduate studies, I actually did my dissertation on the impact of social media and how it crafts national identity for persons who live in the diaspora. And so you might find that as an individual who has lived abroad for 6 years, I've never considered myself as anything other than Kittitian. I've never involved myself in any other electoral processes. I've never participated beyond just being a resident there. I carry the badge as a Kittitian. That's my national identity. Mm-hmm. And so persons can physically live overseas but not have any attachment to that physical space. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, and because of the importance of the diaspora, and because of the work to be a part, you can live abroad and not be a part of a diaspora. That's the first thing I learned when I did my dissertation.
Listen, they have people who just go away and be like, I don't want to be around no Kittitian.
Precisely. You can go abroad and strip yourself of everything that it means to be Kittitian, that national identity. So for those persons who sustain a bona fide interest in St. Kitts and Nevis,
the recommendation I have.
Okay.
But I think the greater conversation that needs to be had is, yes, whether these persons should be allowed to vote, but the greater conversation is whether it is that parties should be responsible for facilitating the return of these persons to participate in the election. I do know of persons, having lived in St. Thomas, who take their own personal funds and they journey onto St. Kitts for the election, That's their personal obligation too. But the question is, should parties be the one to facilitate that return? And if it is the case that parties should be responsible for that return, should public funds be used? And that's why the whole conversation about campaign financing really has to be on the table.
Well, public funds shouldn't be used because that's a
Right.
party. That is a party decision.
Good.
So if we are using public funds to finance party activity, that would be against the law. And that's why, like we said, like you mentioned with the campaign financing, that's a conversation that needs to be concluded. Because we keep hearing about it, but it never seems to get to the finish line. Roma, you wanted to say something?
Well, kind of before Patrice gave her point there, because I feel like building off of what Garth said, part of our issue is that we haven't really figured out how to meaningfully engage the diaspora. We kind of see them as outsiders. First of all, there are lots of different categories of people in the diaspora. Patrice would have spoken about herself as a student. There are some people who move away for work, but they're on temporary work visas. And some of those are shorter than the length of any government's term in office. So you will be in St. Kitts for part of that governance process, whatever. So do you not have that right to come back home just because you've been out for 1.5 years or whatever it is? Are you one of those people who is considered to have abandoned the country with no ties? So it's like, a lot of people, as much as we kind of see, diaspora persons as outsiders, they contribute a lot to maintaining the country, maintaining the region beyond just remittances. So I feel like part of what we really have to address, and I think that a diaspora constituency is kind of a good plan, because you definitely don't want a situation where people who do not ordinarily reside in a place are the ones who are determining the outcomes of the elections.
Yeah,
So you don't want them
yeah.
swinging the elections. If they're not, something is being different overseas, people are overseas seeing a different reality to what's on the ground for people, then you have a serious problem there. And I think that suggestion is a good one.
I like it too.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that persons are more or less saying that, well, there are two classes of citizens, first class, second class. Or the elections in St. Kitts and Nevis is a bit unique to a sense in that we have a lot of voters who reside outside of St. Kitts and Nevis. And I think that is one of the things why some persons may be against overseas voters, if you term them that way, because they can make or break an election, and we can't run from that fact. I agree with my fellow panelists. There are a number of persons in diaspora who fall into different categories. They contribute meaningfully to the economy. They send things for their family members back home. Some of them come back during the Christmas season, during music festival. They contribute to the economy, and they can also bring some sort of some substantial meaning to how we govern or how we do certain things. There are persons who are specialized in different areas who can contribute in terms of education. So we can't cast them aside. But at the same time, I think what some persons are concerned about is those that just come in the day before election or the day of election, leave the next day, and don't come back for 5 years.
Yeah.
That is a problem. That is a serious, serious problem. And if persons don't see that as a problem, then we are going down.
So I guess
So-
maybe in crafting this diaspora constituency or considering their vote, maybe we need to put some stipulations in place that you cannot vote unless you are, I don't know, you have property or
But you're still a
your
citizen
connections.
at the end
But
of
that's
the day.
that's the thing.
That's
So
the conversation.
because you're gonna run yourself in you're gonna run yourself into that problem, especially because this is similar, I think, to the discussion that we had about citizens. Like, who is a citizen? The persons who get married, the government made a decision to allow persons citizenship right after or immediately after as opposed to the previous administration who said wait 3 years. So the government of the day felt like, or feels like, having people wait for citizenship or introducing that sort of stipulation actually takes away their constitutional right to citizenship if they marry someone who is a Kittitian or a Navision. So could we can't really even introduce any kind of stipulations to, in my opinion, and the stipulations will make it the gray area, because the politicians already appeal to the people in diaspora. They actually go to the to the diaspora,
Exactly.
and the people already come home. So it's nothing new,
Yeah.
except introducing maybe a conversation of whether or not people should vote in the embassies or as opposed to coming home or something like that. So I don't necessarily feel as though it will introduce something new.
I mean, in 2010, I think I was an overseas voter. If we
I was an overseas voter in 2010 too, yeah.
Still an overseas voter.
Yes, so
I was an overseas voter for a very long time. You would actually be surprised. I am 37 years old and I have not been able to vote because I was in school during 2 elections and neither side know who I would vote for, so neither side
nobody
would send for
bringing
me.
you.
I had the same experience.
And I was a student. I'm not paying $500 to come home to vote because I'm not in a family like that is hyped with politics. But I think that it's an important constitutional discussion that we should have as a people as to how we select the people, the decision makers, the persons who create our laws. We have come together and decided that we want to follow on with the British tradition of having constituencies and a particular person represent a particular area. Our diaspora has grown so much since 1983, right, that we have to start rethinking what we want to do. I mean, the diaspora constituency might not be a feasible way of going about it because you would have to increase the number of constituencies in both islands. And it might not be able to meet the budget of that. The country might not be able to. But we have to have those discussions. And I think it's our generation, even though I'm much older than most of you, for us to guide the policies moving forward. Because we have to decide. I mean, there's no doubt that a citizen that lives out of the country or a student, as many of us were living out of the country, shouldn't have a voice or a right to vote to decide who is going to be the government. Because I'll give you an example. If you were away, when you were away in school and you couldn't come back, you would have come back during a time where that government would have been in control. So how can you not have a say in that particular government? And I think the reason why the political reason might have been to get more voters, or because there were a lot of people that moved to the Virgin Islands and so forth that they wanted to come back home. But the idea is that these people, even though they actually physically live somewhere else, their connection is so strong to the country that they're domiciled there, that they have a place they could come back to. I originally thought maybe you could do it in such a way where persons who have land could be in that group. But then the more I thought about it, I said, you cannot disenfranchise people just because they don't have land here. There might be people who the reason why they're living abroad is that they want to work for 20 years abroad and come back home.
Yeah, they couldn't find work.
Yeah, exactly.
True.
And they want to save their money and come back and buy land. So you can't disenfranchise those people. But it's a complex conversation. On social media, I think some of these debates tend to be black and white, one side or the other. But a lot of these conversations have many different layers that we need to peel apart, and we need to have everybody's view. Because yes, some of us might be able to speak as we were in the diaspora as students. But what about the persons who left to go to Canada in the 1970s and have been away for 40 years? They should have a say in the decision as well. And this morning we were having a discussion with Dr. Douglas about it in terms of how it's best to go about a decision like that. And it might be best to have that decision through a referendum where you say, listen, we have 3 options. You, the people of St. Kitts and Nevis, decide which option you prefer. And then we, the people who are elected, will will abide by whatever this decision you make. But it also has to be part of a full constitutional reform. We can't take just this individual piece of our democracy and fix it without fixing the whole puzzle.
We have some comments from the online feed. Again, our alarm clock Facebook page, the Alarm Clock YouTube channel, Orwin FM 98.9. Someone is suggesting maybe voluntary contribution to Social Security for overseas voters. And another person is, I guess, agreeing the diaspora needs to have its own constituency, not vote for where you do not ordinarily live. So thanks for those comments.
Well,
Now-
I got some comments on my WhatsApp too.
Mm-hmm.
Some persons were suggesting that we create a tax for the overseas-based citizen, just like what the U.S. does, and that will allow them to be able to continuously make contributions to the country. And I know the U.S. also has a system where you can vote if you're not there. I think they have like a mail-in ballot or something.
Oh, the absentee ballot. I think a
Yes,
lot of
the
people
absentee ballot.
have been calling for that, but that's not something that we could do for June 5th, 2020.
Oh, no.
But so let's switch the conversation a bit to June 5th, 2020. And we're talking about the diaspora vote, and everybody seems to be convinced that that the law says that the persons who are overseas nationals have a legal right to vote. Now, do you still feel the same way in a COVID-19 era where St. Kitts and Nevis is in the position now where all 15 cases have recovered, thankfully, and so we don't have any active cases, and we are opening up the economy more, trying to get back to regular life, and there is a fear that if we allow these persons from the diaspora to come in to vote, some of which are coming from places still having active COVID-19 cases, do we give the overseas nationals the right to vote in this era of COVID-19?
Gian, if my good friend, I have a very good friend who lives in Anguilla, who's a Kittitian, it's just where his work is. If he said to me, Gat, I want to come home to vote, right? And he's going to take up his own money and go on an Air Anguilla flight and come home to vote, and is willing to quarantine for however long the health officials say. I don't think there's any argument you can make against him coming back, particularly because Anguilla also has no cases. I think the problem comes when you start to talk about charters coming from New York, the UK, Miami, and you're talking about hundreds of people rather than one here, one there. I mean, when I saw the report from 2 days ago, I think there were 3 people in the government facility. Now, my view on it is that the health officials should say, listen, there are X amount of spots in quarantine facilities. Our health system can handle X amount of cases of COVID-19 fairly easily. Therefore, the amount of people that the Port Authority can allow back is that amount of people. Because then now, because you have to assume, I'll give you an example. Former Deputy Prime Minister of Barbados, who's now the ambassador in New York, came home to Barbados on a private jet to visit her 95-year-old dying mother, right? She tested positive for COVID-19. She actually was collected from the airport, from what I've read, went to her mother's bedside, interacted with her mother, I would assume hug and kiss, right? Apparently didn't interact with her other family members because of the potential risk. Was tested as soon as she landed, and then was found, I think, the next day or the later that night that she was positive, right? So you have to assume when you're coming from a hotspot, especially because you have to go through an airport and you have to interact with people, taxi, other that you have it. So you cannot let a charter with 150 people come into St. Kitts if the health system cannot handle 150 cases of COVID-19.
But Gath, you're talking about 19 ventilators. So what would you say, like 20 people, first 20?
And then how
The
do
first
you
20 to
determine
come in?
Yeah,
who is
who
that first
will
20?
come?
And then you have to think about financial needs, because that means that a person who might not be financially able initially cannot be a part of that first 20.
Everybody's going to want to be first.
I can't agree
Because
with that
you're
one.
talking about picking maybe 20 from, as you said, 100. So how do you...
Well, the health officials would have to presumably be involved in the process of giving the authorization, because right now the borders are not closed to nationals, you know.
Right.
The borders are closed to commercial flights. But a national can come from Anguilla, get a charter, land in St. Kitts, and there's a current policy in place, I understand, where that person can then be taken to a government facility and must remain there for a certain amount of time, then be tested and released. So technically, a charter of 150 people could come from the UK and, well, could get permission from the authority to come. However, if the authority, the airport authority, SCASPA and NASPA, are consulting with the health officials, I would think that the health officials would say, we can only handle 20, 40, 50, 60 cases of COVID-19. Let's say our statistics show that people return, the likelihood is that 40% of them have it. So therefore, you can allow a charter of 150 people because we can handle if 40% have it. I don't know how you make that risk assessment, but the problem is, we have done so much over the last 2 months. I don't know about y'all, but I've been very uncomfortable over the last 2 months. I mean, even though I like my home, I don't want to be in there all the time. These 24-hour weekends were tough to deal with,
They were.
you know, emotionally and otherwise. So we have done and sacrificed so much to get to this point.
I mean, this is our first Saturday in 2 months?
Yeah, and we were talking about how weird it feels to be out on a Saturday again.
Yeah, and you know, people have done so much, and the potential is there, especially with the conversation about quarantine, people can be stopped from voting. That's the other thing.
Well,
Here's another factor too. What about tests?
Yeah.
Yes, you'll bring in 150 people. You'll have to test 150. That's 150 less tests that the government has.
It would be just putting too much strain
Yeah,
on our
I
health
personally don't
system.
think it's worth.
Well, we have a comment from Justin Henry. I really believe that these overseas voters should be allowed to vote. However, it should be at the voter's expense and not the party. It does not matter the affiliation. It should not be at the cost of the party to bring you home. So we have someone on our Facebook feed who's feeling very passionate about that. So, and someone else, we have a comment, the right to vote is universal. So we're not denying that. We're not denying that at all. But how do the other panelists feel about the overseas vote and bringing in? Well, we've differentiated into two things: the person who wants to come home at their own expense, and secondly, the political party charters. So how does the panel feel about that? Anybody? Bite. We know how Gath is.
Let me tell you something, right? I have read this section very carefully over the last 10 years, Section 108 of the National Assembly Elections Act. It is an act of bribery, in my opinion, as a lawyer, to pay for anybody's ticket to come home, for the person whose ticket is paid for to vote when you've received that ticket from a political party, for any political party donor to pay for a charter, for anybody who came on that charter to vote. All of those persons, in my personal opinion, I could be wrong, have committed a breach of Section 108, which speaks to the definitions of bribery. There is another section which says it is not bribery for a party to arrange for a person to be able to go to a polling station.
How does that differ, though?
It is very different, Natasha. I'm happy you said that. Because when you make exceptions to criminal offenses, they must be very specific. That section doesn't say a political party can facilitate the voter voting. It says that you can arrange for some to transport that person to the polling station, right? The whole premise of Section 108 is to keep money out of the political process so that nobody's paid to vote, nobody's promised a job to vote, nobody is benefiting from voting other than using their right to vote.
But Gaff isn't transporting. Aren't you transporting me from the UK
That's what I
to
was
St.
thinking.
Kitts?
Yes, I was thinking.
I-
That.
To
I'm
get
To
me
the
to the
polling
polling
station.
station, if I'm not.
I'm going to find the word in and I'll come back.
So we'll discuss that. But we actually have another question here. Can citizens by investment register to vote? Under what circumstances? Are they considered diaspora? Should they? Are they a source of investment for the development of the country beyond their initial investment to become citizens? Do we know who these people are? Is there a register? There's lots of questions. Questions surrounding the citizens who would have gained their citizenship through investment. Any comments, Natasha?
I've always heard that persons who are economic citizens cannot vote. In looking at the section as it relates to who qualifies as a voter, most economic citizens, they don't live here. They've never even seen St. Kitts. And so I don't think they would fit under the category of a citizen who is ordinarily resident because some of them have never, literally never, they have never stepped foot in St. Kitts. In terms of a citizen who is 18 years old, ordinarily resident overseas, but domiciled in St. Kitts, one would have to establish whether or not they have some sort of roots in a particular constituency to see if they fit in that category. And if they are not a Commonwealth citizen who is ordinarily resident, and I think that is where the argument may have came from that economic citizens cannot vote.
But if they're not
But-
from a Commonwealth country.
Yes. So I think, in my view and my understanding of the legislation, once they don't qualify on these three categories, then the registration officer would have to satisfy themselves that they qualify as a voter. I'm not sure. Some persons who acquire economic citizen, some of them end up having properties in the federation, and so that may put a twist on things because if you have a property at Beacon Heights, that may be a physical address for that particular person as well.
So property alone. So even when we're talking about the people in diaspora, property alone can get you a vote. There must be some strong connection, either through birth or marriage, that gives you that right to vote.
I think the Citizenship by Investment Act specifically says that you don't get the right to vote,
Okay.
I believe it actually says that. I'll look for it right now. But I found the section I was talking about to help the discussion.
Yeah, it's serious. Yes.
Go
ahead.
It's 2020, the laws are online.
Yes.
yes,
So
yes.
it says after the definition of bribery, which includes paying money or kind to someone to vote, it says the foregoing provisions of this section shall not extend or be construed to extend to any money paid or agreed to be paid for or on account of any legal expenses incurred in good faith at or concerning an election. For the purpose of this section, legal expenses include, and this is the important section, payments made for the purpose of hiring vehicles for the conveyance of voters to or from a polling station. I repeat that. Payments made for the purpose of hiring vehicles for the conveyance of voters to or from a polling station.
So you're telling me that if a political party hires a taxi to pick up all the party supporters, that is against the law?
No. That they're saying that is an exception.
Oh, that's an
Okay.
So a
exception.
political party can hire a big bus
And
to
the
in
And a plane.
And the
no.
That's the
And a
point.
plane.
You can't.
And you see, that is why I must say I always have some very good arguments, even in the Court of Appeal, with my learned friend Natasha Gray. because it's very important. This is a very important discussion because the question is, do you consider, or would a court consider, the conveyance of a person by a plane from one country to another country
Transportation.
as a legal expense. And it is it is arguable. I'm on one side, everyone else is on the other side, but it's an important debate. But we really shouldn't even have that debate because reform should deal with all of that.
Yes, and that's actually one of the comments that we're seeing throughout the thread. Electoral reform is badly needed in St. Kitts and Nevis to finally conclude on these issues. We definitely see that. Just to say, okay, we have some messages coming in, but I'll check those later. Now, we're talking about who should vote. So in the last half an hour or so of the show, I want us to switch the conversation of why people should vote now. We have a lot of people who are they're not enthusiastic about voting at all. They're not interested. They see voting for either side as a waste because they feel like nothing is really changing. There are people who voted a particular way or and they're not satisfied, so they just don't feel like they should go back. Let's go into discussion about why people should vote, and we're all people here who I believe will encourage people to exercise that right. So what reasons would you give people of why they should vote?
I want to start by saying that I thought about this question for quite some time, and I know the popular answer, the first answer would be because it's your involvement in the democratic process. And I think it's a bit misconstrued that your sole involvement or your premier involvement in the democratic process is by voting. And I want to further go on to encourage us to get young persons to be involved in participation in nation building. This whole idea of civic responsibility, getting them involved in associations that will allow them to understand what is happening in their nation, getting them involved in, it might be student council or a youth parliament or a national youth council or a youth organization. That way they have a greater sense of civic responsibility so that when they do attain the voting age, the conversation is not, why should I go put my ex somewhere? But it's because you understand that you have a vested interest in your nation and your vote can be translated towards whatever interest you may have to contribute to that nation. I think that's where the conversation needs to start. Because when young people tell me, I have a lot of persons who I'm speaking to because I'm a first-time voter, as I'm 27, but I've never voted because I've lived abroad for some time. And when I'm trying to speak to persons about, are you going to vote? And I'm getting these responses that many people are not interested in voting, I'm saying to myself, well, how can that be the case? It means that the people have lost hope, they have lost interest. And that is because this whole idea of civic responsibility has not been ingrained in them from a very young age. And that's my stance as to why vote.
Now, Patrice, I'll ask you two questions, though. You said that people need to get involved in nation building. Mm-hmm. When you wake up on a Tuesday morning, ready to go to work or go to school, what do you mean by getting involved in nation building? How can you work that into your daily activities? What exactly are you talking about in terms of people getting involved in nation building? Listening to radio, calling in on the radio, like what exactly are you talking about? Like what practical steps can people take to get involved in nation building outside of like joining a group or something?
Okay, well, I was going to say that's the first step, that you can join an organization, a community organization. You can actively be involved in any sort of public consultations that there might be taking place as it relates to any legislation that they're trying to bring about or any policy that a government of the day is trying to bring about as well. Registering to vote and registering to be a part of a political organization. All of these, and actually petitioning, and it might not be to the extent of actually picketing or protesting, but petitioning to suggest that, yes, you have a vested interest in this country. That's what I think of when I think of involvement in the civic process and being a citizen. We don't have a lot of civic-minded young people to an extent from my vantage point, and we're not being as observant as we ought to as to what's taking place, and we're not able to formulate an opinion. That means that you're not entirely getting involved in the democratic process.
Okay. So, Roma, in your opinion, why should people vote?
Gian, you said that, you know, some people are talking about not wanting to vote because they feel like whether it is both or all parties are the same, they feel probably like they're dissatisfied with what's happening, or even if you're satisfied with what's happening, those are reasons to vote. So if you don't like what's going on in a place, or you do like what's going on in a place, that gives you enough reason to vote. You are affected by whatever happens in the country. I feel like sometimes policy plans or policy intentions aren't necessarily communicated clearly to people so they understand how they are individually impacted. Sometimes people feel as if what happens at government level has no relevance in their life, when that is absolutely false. So they need to focus on how whatever policies, whatever ideas, whatever visions politicians are putting forward actually will impact them sometimes in their everyday lives, sometimes in what they can have access to, in whether or not they can afford to live in the country, in whether or not they could import a vehicle, buy a car, and different things. All of these policies, plans, projects, programs, whatever, put in place by government, enacted through various ministries and departments, affect the people, and people need to become more aware of how they are like integral or interconnected with the happenings of government. So I think that is, I mean, your vote is your voice. It is your power. It doesn't end or begin on election day. It continues after that. It begins before that. And people really need to be aware of how much they have a say in what happens. They have a say in what they're not pleased with throughout that 5 years. So you don't have to wait another 5 years to decide, okay, I wasn't pleased with this. You know, you can get involved anywhere in the middle of that process where you don't feel like people are living up to their mandate, or where you feel like something has happened and it requires a shift in thinking for politicians. So perhaps it was like, so for example, this situation that we find ourselves in right now, coronavirus, we've always had overseas voters. So it's just not anything that just started with coronavirus. So it would have required people in power, people in authority positions, whatever, to plan for that situation just in case that was what we were going to have to deal with. But that hasn't happened. So you're looking at things like the absence of a proper disaster mitigation plan, or the absence of the communication of that plan, because perhaps things are happening, but we're having these conversations because we're not aware. So that's something, you know, those are all reasons that people need to be voting, because you vote for what you want to see.
Right. Natasha, anything?
I think voting is something that people need to look beyond election day. And some people just, they recognize that, you know, some people say, okay, I'm not going to vote because this party this and this party that, but they don't look beyond that part. They don't look about how it affects them in their day-to-day life. You go to the hospital if there are not enough medical supplies, if you know there are taxes that affect you, the roads that you drive on, every minute you have to change your vehicle tire. These are things that affect you as a result of the voting. And so if you let your voice be heard, you don't have to go and put on your yellow shirt or your red shirt or whatever, but your voice can be heard once you put the proper representative in place to ensure that the normal day-to-day things that affect you are dealt with in the proper manner. These are things that this is a good reason why people should vote and express that democratic right on election day.
All right. Well, that's some really good information. And I want to, well, of course, we have about 20 more minutes, but we would open the phone lines to persons who may want to give their comments, because we definitely have some active commentary going on the alarm clock faces. Shout out to all the clockers who are listening. So of course the local number 762 or 662 or 466, and then the last four numbers are 0989. So that's 762-0989, 662-0989. Oh, we have a call. Hi, caller. Good afternoon. Hello.
Afternoon. Good
Yes.
afternoon.
Yes, we're hearing you.
Good day to your panel and your program today. And I'd like to say blessed love to all the young people who are there. But one thing I heard God was referring to when he had the farmer leader and he had a comrade there, Miss Marcella Lightbud,
Mm-hmm.
and he asked about the aspect of voting when it comes to bribery and them things, and I see him outline it while I was discussing, and I would like to add into that, because these are one of the things the farmer leader was emphasizing when in 2010 of the same thing, considering to how you do election campaigning and them things, and I realized he tried to dodge around the man question in the studio, and if I had get him God, I would have put Mr. Denzel Douglas on the spot, because he needs to really put the emphasis of what he said in the only time to know, to really see what the challenges against people and the people of the nation. And that is why we realize these politicians ain't going to take these scraps and say these things need to stop. Because they know that they are gaining behind these closed doors. And it's time with people, as young people, I don't vote there, and I could talk because these are things that hope what I see over the years after the election done. Many people don't get the grasp that they need to see rising as a people. We say we have to be rich. We say we must be sustainable. And this is why young people at this time who are aspiring to be in young leadership role, you all need to question these people who are called as head of our party or head of our whatever establishment you all are working with when it comes to these patterns of election time. Because the people then behind the clothes who call the shot, not all you. I only have initiative words to give to. But when it comes to setting ground, you all are laid behind. And then the people who behind is coming in front to tell us these are policy makers. So I hope that you all really look into yourself and don't let these leaders who say they are leaders, because all of them are pursuing for the globalists and the people who are controlling but the banking institution, because these are methods that still claim under our context of what we've seen when it comes to political.
Okay, thank you.
Within.
Okay.
So,
Thank you, caller. Thank you.
Yeah, man, great thanks. You all
Okay.
have a safe
Yes.
day.
We have
Thanks.
another caller, Jan,
Yes,
so
go
I'll just
ahead.
put that caller on.
Yes. Hi. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Oh, it seems we lost that caller. Are they back? Okay, they're back. Hi. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. This argument that the diaspora vote is some monolith out there that jumps on a plane and choose a government for those of us who live here is really a fallacy. I mean, half of the electorate at any one time could vote for a government, and the other half has to live with that decision. Okay, so there's no difference.
Okay.
And the way I look at it, anyone who has the right to vote now should be afforded that opportunity. Okay, I'm not saying that those regulations can't change, but you don't take away the right that somebody has. Okay, that's unprincipled. Okay, grandfather it out if necessary, if we agree that it shouldn't happen, but don't take away a right that somebody already have. And basically, I have a question concerning our procedures for this current poll.
Yes, go ahead.
The fact is, we know that the election, this is not a normal election, and so we would expect the procedures to be different from before. So why can't we facilitate the opposition and the government coming together and facilitating voting at the place of origin of voters? Okay? In other words, it would be safer for them and safer for us. There's absolutely no reason that because this is a different situation from before, right? And even if for just this situation, recall cabinet and put the things in place to be able to make that happen. Okay, but I don't believe anybody who has the right to vote now should be prevented from exercising that right.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much, caller, for that.
Okay, we have another call.
And another call. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Yeah, no, that caller didn't come on, Gian.
Oh, okay.
Gian, if I could just chime in, I think it's very important that we recognize, based on our history, that there are a lot of people who went through torture and death to give us the opportunity to be able to run our own country. And it should inspire people, our people, to go out and make decisions that affect them day to day. The right to vote is an important right. It is a right to vote against, it is a right to vote for, and it is also a right not to vote. Our ancestors fought for that right so that we can live in a free, democratic society. And if young people don't see the importance of that, I think they need to. Being part of civic organizations, I totally agree. That is where the rubber hits the road. That is when you realize that decisions that are made, being part of any organization actually, I mean, I could actually say my experience in UE in particular, being part of organizations that made things happen that mattered to people, showed me how important it is to be able to put people in positions to make a difference. And participating and in group activities, in Scouts, in all of these different groups is very important at a young age, so that young people can realize that it matters. You know, it's not just a talk about policies, it's a decision that you make in a room with other people can have an impact on other people's lives. I'll give the example. When you and Desi, Gian and Desi, had discussion to bring up this program, right? Mm-hmm. You were making a decision to have an impact on people's lives. And just from the response of last week, the first show alone, you have seen that you have churned people's minds and you've made an impact. And I think when you become part of organizations and groups, you realize how important that is. And that extends to our civic duty to cast our vote or to decide not to go to the polls.
Right.
Because a lot of people argue. I had an argument on Facebook, not an argument, with a friend, a debate on Facebook. Said, because I was telling you, I'm not sure if I'm going to vote. I made a decision to go to vote. I don't know who I'm going to vote for. Or if I'm going to just spoil my ballot. I don't know. That's my right. He said, if you don't vote for someone, you are making mockery of your ancestors who fought so hard for your right to vote. And I said, no, they fought so hard for me to have a free mind to be able to choose for somebody, against somebody, or for neither.
But I would actually, I think I'm on the side of your friend, Gath, because the fact of the matter is, in our history, we were denied that vote. So actually taking the decision to not vote, in my opinion, is actually not helping. It's not really helping. And when you consider the energy and the effort that had to go in for our ancestors to convince people who were over us that please allow me a chance to have a say in my affairs. It really, I think it is. I'm not telling anybody, in my personal opinion, I don't think I would ever take that decision. I think that as much as you look at both of your options, there must be one that is a little less worse than the other one. Even if you don't think of them as one being a little better than the other one. Because the fact of the matter is, somebody will win. If 3 people go out to vote, somebody will win that seat. And whoever is chosen is going to be the one with the power to make to contribute to the direction of whatever happens in your constituency, and if that person is in government on a national scale. So to me, that's why people should vote. because no matter what, one of them gonna win. And you should make sure that the one that you at least favor by a centimeter has more of an opportunity to add to the discourse. The party gonna happen whether or not we show up. So we may as well make sure that the people that we have a say in who shows up on our behalf. When we look at our last election, we saw a candidate win by 4 votes. There are 5 people in the studio, 7 if we count, well, 8 if we count the 3 in the control room. If this room had showed up and voted for the other candidate, he would have won. And we have so many instances in our political history of people winning by small margins, 20, 40, and all of these different things. So you could imagine you have a family of people who decide, well, me not like he, and me not like he neither. So none of we going to vote. And that's it. That one family could impact the vote. So I just want for people to consider how you would feel if you favor a candidate and you hear that they lose by 1 and you didn't go vote. That's the reason I think people should vote, because it can have a huge impact. Imagine if both sides are equal and we're waiting for this one box, and then you hear one candidate win, the last candidate win by 1, and then you realize may went a vote. I could have changed the entire government.
Had you voted, it would
had
have
you
been a tie.
voted, well, 2. Yes, it would have been a tie.
And
Yes,
then
but
the returning officer would have had to make that casting vote.
right. But the fact of the matter is, imagine 2 people could make that huge impact. And I just believe it's better and more useful to choose to vote, even if one you favor one at least more than the other. I mean, we're not going to tell people who to vote for, but yes, we have a caller.
You've convinced me, Gian.
Okay. Hi, caller. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.
I'm not a citizen. I'm calling from Munshot. I'm a regular caller.
Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Montserrat.
Listen here. Yes, when I am around domicile, me may look for develop the topic like how you get on the voters list. Because listen, let me say now you live in St. Paul, but you move to Sandy Point. No, remember you can't go back. You can't go back now. Although you're from there, you can't go back the way you move from. Go vote, right or wrong?
Yes. You can go back.
No.
If your name is still on the register in St. Paul's, you can go back to St. Paul's to vote. But the proper thing for you to do...
Get me. When you move, your name's supposed to move.
You're supposed to go in and make that change.
Go to where you live. No, just get me. I understand what you're saying, but no, just get the point that me make. If you move out to one constituency and go to the other constituency, by right, your name's supposed to move too. By such and such a time.
I agree with you,
Okay,
but how
so we
would...
talk about the overseas now. Because you say now domicile, you got roots to this place. You got roots to that place. So then now, how you go tie now? How you go tie this family with a family overseas and this family move out? How you go tie the family the overseas now to back here now? To this family back here now in the constituency. And that's one point, if I understand. And the other point is, when you go out and you look for, you say, okay, well, me know this person here, me know this person here, me know this person here. And you take name off of the list that inside of the country. How can you so sure now, but somebody overseas now on the list? You get the point, my gaff?
I take the point. I take the point. It's a
Right.
very, it's,
Because inside of the country, you say you don't know this person and nobody can identify. So then and therefore somebody overseas now, we don't even ban, but then got one grandfather, grandmother relationship. Who now identify the somebody there? Okay then.
Thank you.
Thank you, Montserrat, and please make sure you send some goat water by DHL for all of us.
All right. Just to follow up with some of
Sorry, Jan, we have another
Oh,
caller.
wow.
Sorry.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. I am calling from overseas, and as someone who, let me say first, good afternoon to all the panelists.
Good afternoon.
Good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon to Jan. I hope you probably recognize my voice.
Hi, Uncle.
But so I think the people overseas, and I must say, I have voted in St. Kitts several times. I've been overseas for about 30 years. I've been back home to vote several times. But I think I've had a new take on the overseas voting. And so I think I posted this early online on the Facebook chat. I think everybody overseas want to have a say. They want to have a vote. Give them a vote. But this is the way it should be done. The overseas, everybody in the diaspora, whether you're in England, you're in New York, you're in St. Thomas, Anguilla, put everybody together in one vote, and you give them one representative. That representative, each party can campaign for the overseas vote. So you can vote for whoever. CCM can have a representative, Labour can have one, PAM can have one, and that entire block of people overseas, they'll be voting for that representative who will look after their needs. And there's a host of things that can be done for the overseas people. But at the same time, they would not be, they cannot sway the election easily because they have only one vote. Okay, so we get the opportunity to vote. We elect our representatives, so we are participating, but we are not in effect say, well, we are going to sway the election to this particular party or that particular party, because you can vote for whatever party, whatever candidate you want, because every party can have their own candidate. And I think that's the way that the overseas voters, it's probably going to be maybe more people outside of St. Kitts voting than what's inside. But I think that would be the fair and equitable way to have the overseas voters participate in the election. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, Gian, just on that point, because somebody sent me a WhatsApp about that the whole overseas constituency and how it could work. It's actually very easy, and it actually, I would say, makes sense. Here's what you do. You make Nevis 5 constituencies like they have locally now already. You then now only have to add one's constituency in St. Kitts. So you could probably make the largest constituency, for
Number
example,
8.
Keon and Connery could have their own constituency, and Monkey Hill and Shadwell could have their own constituency. You have 9, and then you have the diaspora. So that there are 15 total constituencies. Nevis could do away with this foolishness of having to vote every 2.5 years. They vote once for local and federal. They have 5. St. Kitts has 9, and they have a diaspora constituency. That is how we could actually work with the Constitution as is right now, by making sure that Nevis has 1/3 of the total.
Okay. And just for some other comments, we have someone, in addition, there are no perfect candidates, parties, or governments, so waiting on better options is a never-ending wait. Not voting would help if people decided to stop choosing the lesser of two evils and deciding that none are worthy of the vote. But that is a powerful statement. However, it is stripped of its power if only a minority of voters do it. Like I said, we just need 3. Somebody is asking, is write-in votes allowed? And I think we were discussing this before the show. We saw there's a video circulating of someone saying that they'll be contesting in the next elections, and she was encouraging persons to write in her name and put an X to it. So we want to make it abundantly clear to everybody who is listening that write-in votes are not allowed, and if you do in fact write in somebody's name and put an X, you are spoiling your ballot. Somebody else saying overseas voters have an advantage in choosing which constituency to vote. I think that's what the Montserrat caller is trying to say. And I have a colleague of mine who says the same things. The people overseas get to come back and just pick a constituency. But I think they would still, like you said, Natasha, they'd have to convince the registration officer that there's some sort of link to that.
And I think the legislation says that you would have had to have, wherever you lived, register
Before.
directly before you left.
Yes.
But I still feel like if they get to choose, they should
But there's
get to
also
choose.
another part that I picked up on.
Wait, Patrice, we have a caller, so just stick up in there. Hi, caller. Good afternoon.
Gian, if you could just ask the callers to ask 1 minute questions because they have very
Yes,
limited time.
we're
Okay,
yes.
I'll bring them on.
Yes. Good afternoon, caller, and if you could be very brief, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Dart Whittington, and good afternoon to Ms. Gian Williams and the rest young ladies them there. Now, my little input, I'll be listening to you all. And, you know, this is a modern type of politics now, because in them days back, people vote for political party and vote for whatever. But people now vote for something, them young people vote for something. Because I going out there and everybody's saying that they would need something. And some people, you know, they don't vote because maybe they don't go vote because the same the opposition was there to contest the election and they win the election, they go and they do the same thing. So some people don't say that they don't vote for nobody because the same thing, same old, so the same old they see. But I see that this government make a big difference in our politics in this Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. That a lot of things have changed. And, you know, they're going in and they try to help the people, give land, give money, give work, and try to, when I mean give work and empower the young people to get job, to give them a chance in life. And I believe that this government is trying the endeavor best to see the young and ordinary man and woman in this country, like, you know, to do what they got to do and make a living over something.
Okay.
Anyway, wonderful program, good topic.
Thank
God
you.
bless.
Thank you so much. The last caller, please. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hello, good afternoon. Okay, I guess we...
Good afternoon.
Oh, yes.
How are you?
I'm good,
Good afternoon to everyone. Good. I wanted to just say thank you to the young lady who has stated her thoughts on everyone should vote. I do agree with that. It's a privilege, so everyone should be encouraged to go out and vote. Whether you vote for one party or the other, it does make a difference. It does impact everyone's lives. And if you care about others, you should be willing to go out to vote. Thank you. Have a
Okay,
great day.
thank you very much. Folks, we have 2 more minutes. We have to make way for the Team Unity panelists who are coming on next. So if we could just have 30 seconds from each panelist, your final thoughts, anything you want to leave with the listeners. Roma, you want to?
Sure. I just want to encourage all people, especially the young people, to go out and vote. You are the ones who are likely to be, not likely, you are the ones who are going to be most affected by anything that happens in the next 5 years. We are the ones who have to deal with the consequences of the people that we choose. So please, go out and vote. Vote for what you want to see. Vote for a party that you feel like is the one that is best positioned to lead our country forward. Vote for your friends. Vote for your family. Vote for your cousins. Vote for your unborn children. Vote for the people around you, even if you haven't particularly been impacted in any kind of way by policies, plans. Vote for the other people who have. Vote not just for yourself, but vote for a St. Kitts and Nevis with like the best possible chance for succeeding.
Okay. Natasha?
I would encourage persons who are registered to go out and vote on the 5th of June. Voting would help you to choose your future, the type of future that you want, even if it doesn't get to the point where you want it in the next 5 years. At least you would be able to make some steps bit by bit. Go out and vote for what you would want to see St. Kitts and Nevis to be. Choose the person that you think can help you to get St. Kitts and Nevis to the position that you would want it to be. The vote, the right to vote is something that gives you power. Exercise that power to ensure that, you don't have any regrets in not carrying out that right, so that you can have a say. You can put people in place in Parliament to have a say and give recommendations. Don't do away with, don't cancel out what you think, okay, both parties are the same. I'm not going to vote for one because they're going to do the same thing. Try and ensure that you secure your right. Try and ensure that you exercise it in the best possible way. I wouldn't encourage you to spoil your ballot like my learned friend may want to do, because that wouldn't get you anywhere. You would have your options. On Wednesday next week, you would know what your options are. You would have a following week to decide which option you think is the best one. And I would encourage everyone to go out. Encourage your family members to go out. Encourage your friends to go out and vote. And you would be able to know that you have played your part in helping St. Kitts and Nevis to be a better place.
All right, so I'll chime in here. I'll give support to all of the pleas that were made earlier about persons going out to vote, especially young people. But in the same token, I want our politicians to take a real good look at the demographics of the persons who will attract the majority of your vote in this election. One of the things that I think that we need to realize is that the millennial vote, as well as the Generation Z, because the millennial vote would have ended at 1994, so I almost missed it. We almost missed it. But Generation Z, they're also a part of that new cohort of voters that can exercise that franchise on the 5th of June. And you have to recognize that these are not the same persons who are going to vote from a washing machine and a refrigerator. These are the persons who are interested in the policies and the development and what opportunities can be offered for them. So bear this in mind. This is also not a group of persons who vote based on the allegiance of their families and the allegiance of their parents and whatever their last names are. So I want us to pay great attention to the dynamics that these new voters are bringing, because I think a very large understanding of that is totally missed. And as I would have mentioned earlier, your involvement in nation building and the democratic process is not only by way of voting. It's by becoming extremely involved in what you want to see for your country. Become more observant. Hold your leaders accountable. Speak out when you don't see something going right based on what is just, based on what is fair. And I'm going to make the final plug for my organization, the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association, who has for a very long time, even from when Jeanne Williams would have been there, Mrs. Zilla Clark would have been there, been lobbying for a debate between our political leaders, been lobbying for a debate between our political parties, been asking you to come in and speak with us because we have ideas that we want to share. We have questions we want to ask you because we hold you accountable to that process. So we want clean conversations. We want clean debates. We don't want any refrigerators. Maybe some people do our televisions, but we want opportunities. We want opportunities, and that's the tone that I want to leave as it relates to my remarks today.
I think people are taking refrigerators but still voting however they want.
You know what? I'm just not going to comment on the refrigerator. I'm just going to leave it.
Maybe it's not a
right
refrigerator, maybe it's a microwave.
But if you need it.
If you need it? Yeah. Okay, well, let's not make fun of that. Gab?
Thank you.
I really wish I had the opportunity to vote for one of you powerful ladies.
Next election,
Is this a mini launch? Are we having a mini launch?
Listen,
Natasha Gray.
I grew up with two powerful women. So I understand the capabilities of powerful women. My mother and my grandmother are very powerful women. I honestly wish there were more women in our politics. And I really hope I live to see the day where we have a woman prime minister. Gian, last time I said that on the first program, I saw your face light up. It's
Always.
It's a genuine belief I have. I have so much respect for women who get into politics. I love hearing Mia Motley speak.
Me too.
I just tune in. I don't even care what she's talking about. I want to hear it. You know what I mean? So
I think you like the Bayesian accent.
I don't want to offend anybody on the air. And Barbados has given a lot to me. I went to high school there. But the point is, I think with women leaders, we would also get more accountability.
Absolutely.
And that word had a great impact on me when you said it just now. The right to vote is not the right to go to the polling station, mark your X, and leave, and that right is over. That right carries with you to hold whoever you voted for or whoever you didn't vote for and other people in your constituency voted for, hold them accountable for their actions for the next 5 years. So I want the young people who are listening to know it is not just exercising your franchise on June 5th. It is from June 6th to whenever the next election is. You have to hold whoever is responsible for your constituency, whether you voted for them or not, accountable. I have made a personal decision, despite backlash, right, to speak out for what I think is right, to host programs and help to educate people. That is my contribution because I've made that personal decision, right? I'm not going to run for political office. I'll tell you that right now.
Never say never.
I can say never.
When the
never.
right woman asks you, you might you might change your mind.
Me and my wife on the same page in that regard. But everybody has a different role to play. The youth parliament has a role to play. Other civic society organizations have their role to play. It's not just the politicians. It's just 8 of them, It's just 8 of them. Well, 11.
I'm just about to say,
Sorry.
leave out Nevis.
Yeah, 11 of them. So there are a lot more people that can contribute in another way. And the right to vote, the right to have a say continues. I want people to understand. It continues after voting day, right? And you should exercise that right responsibly and with sober thought. Let me tell you, politicians, I came to that realization yesterday morning. Politicians during silly season, all they want to do is strike up your emotions. That's why you see these videos on Facebook. That's why you hear this bad talking other people and saying this person is corrupt and this person is bad and this person shouldn't be there. They're trying to make you make a decision based on emotions. There's no decision as to who to run the government should be made 18 days before an election. You have 5 years to put everything, filter everything to your brain to make your decision. And I thank you for this program because of this program and these powerful ladies, I'm going to vote now. I'm not going to spoil my ballot. So you see, I've seen the light today, right? And I hope other people have seen the light. That is important that you exercise your right, even if it's the lesser of two evils, unfortunately.
Well, I would just add to what you said, Garth, about voting. If you realize voting is the most direct voice that you have that cannot be uncounted. So if you choose for it to be uncounted by spoiling your ballot or not voting, that would be your choice. But your voice is directly counted into the final decision. When they go to cabinet, sometimes they may listen to what youth parliament said. So youth parliament might have done a grand report and they read it and they say, well, we can't study that right now. They take that decision and then your voice is pushed to the side. But nobody can push your vote to the side. So in the whole democratic process, voting is the most direct way to get your voice heard, and it has to be counted unless you choose to not have it counted. So just in case people are thinking that we're gone over time. We have the permission to continue to continue. So just to go back to some of the comments that we're getting, very good suggestion about the overseas constituency. Gath, somebody's putting a spokes in your wheel. Travis Gibson is saying the overseas constituency is an ideal, but what about the stipulation about as equal a number of electors or inhabitants per constituency? So how do you deal with that? Because then the diaspora constituency may have many thousands.
But in order to get, you have to have constitutional change to get the 15
Right.
constituencies. So you would have to make an exception for the overseas constituency, and you would have to keep the same rules for the remaining 14. So that's the only way. You would have to make an exception, because that, I mean, in 20 years, in 10 years, 15 years, the number of people in that constituency number 15, the overseas voters, could very well be the same as in all the rest of the constituencies. I saw the supervisor of elections said that there are 45,000 people. I guarantee you that's 15,000 people who are not here.
Or more.
45,000.
Because we have a we have a
match.
population of 50,000 people, and how many of those people are under 18? So there's no way they could have 45, even 30,000 registered voters. I think is a lot. So it could be. I take the point. It would have to be by way of constitutional reform that the overseas constituency number 15, quote unquote, would be able to work as an exception to the equal number of inhabitants. Natasha pointed out in the discussion we had earlier about the economic citizens, the legislation specifically says that they cannot vote.
Yes.
But that has not been challenged constitutionally,
We have Leah Craig Chatterton, council is weighing in as well. She made that point on the feed, saying that economic citizens do not have a right to vote as per the legislation. So we're agreed on that one. And then we have another comment here. Can we seriously look at proportional representation as opposed to first past the post? Or a combination of both to select parliaments and governments? Patrice, you shook your head
because
just now.
I've been in favor of that for such a very long time, probably since social studies grade 4. I really think that we need to vote for the candidates that we need to holistically farm the government. We need to vote for the candidates.
Could you explain for listeners who might not be aware, even if you give real-time examples?
So basically, if we look at the present slate of elected representatives, they will all form the government. So whoever it is that you vote for, they will be the representative for, because they'll no longer be constituencies. So you'll vote for a slate. So I think Montserrat, I think they have it. Am I correct? They do. So if it is at a slate of a candidate pool of 20 candidates, as suggested, you can vote for 10 of those candidates to form your government. That's what first past the post is. Because sometimes you see some really good candidates, but in colloquial terms, they're on the wrong side. And they don't
Or they're not in your constituency, so you can't
they're not
vote
in
for
your
them.
constituency,
Right.
and they don't end up being a part of the government. And it's a real missed opportunity. So I have always been in favor of proportional representation.
So essentially the difference is our ballot now has on two names. No, unless there's some independence. But the first past the post ballot will have on all
20 names.
Well, in St. Kitts, I don't know, would we vote for Nevis? I don't think we'd vote for Nevis as well. Maybe just the ones in
it's a
St. Kitts.
federal government,
So we'll
so more
have
than
all
likely.
16, at least in St. Kitts. The 16 in St. Kitts, and maybe Nevis will have the 6 in Nevis. And you pick your favorite 8. And the ones with the most votes form the government or get a seat on the opposition according to which one has the majority. So Montserrat has that system right now, so we could look at that. Gath, do we still have a call?
Yes, I think we could take one more call and then we have to wrap up.
Hi, caller. Good afternoon.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
I didn't believe I would have get in anyway.
Lucky you.
Interesting conversation and discussion. I'm sorry.
Call, you need to turn off your radio.
I'm sorry. A little technicality there.
Happens to the best of us.
He teaches at a university in the US. I think around 2014, 15, he was giving some hint about how to move from the Westminster system and just make the country one big constituency. So we deal with proportional representation. But I think he also mentioned, and if he didn't, well, my thing is to ask, if we can vote for that by amending the Constitution,
Yes.
would we include recall? Because in much of these systems, like in the United States, California in particular, you have a recall. I don't know if it is in the British Virgin Islands too, but some of them have a recall clause in there. So they could recall a governor or a representative and all of that. So would you include that? If you think that is something wise to do, if you're going to go to the proportional representation?
I'm not sure what exactly you're speaking.
And lastly, look at Guyana. Guyana got proportional representation. And look the chaos they got here in terms of counting or declaring who is the winner or not. So I just say that. So you could comment for me, please.
Thank you. I mean, confusion is all over. Every system will have its flaws. So, but thanks for that. And just to another comment we had here, it's hard to vote when party principles aren't clearly divided along policy lines, and we won't ever know this without debates. So again, somebody is calling for debates. But I see we have to wrap up now. Again, thank you to all of you who are listening and participating. This has been the special edition of Alarm Clock on Inside the News. And again, if for anybody else anybody who has not been familiar with Alarm Clock, we really recognize that there's a need to try to explain and talk about issues with politics and governance in simple ways and educate the public, because you would be surprised the kind of questions people ask when it comes to government. People don't understand the difference between federal government and Nevis Island administration and a lot of things that we take for granted. So we really want to help to plug those educational gaps so that people could make themselves as aware as possible when it comes to politics and governance, so they make the best, most informed decisions. So from Alarm Clock, we just want to thank Win FM for the opportunity to come here today. And again, if you have any future discussions or future topics, future panelists you want us to include in the show, please let us know. We want to thank Garth again, a return panelist, Patrice Harris, Natasha Gray, and Wilma Richardson for joining us here on the Alarm Clock and bringing your perspectives, and of course showing people that we could talk about politics without abusing and being disrespectful. So it can be done, and we want to be the example to people that we can have these discussions without it being, full of vitriol. So with that said, I've been your host, Gian Williams, and see you next time on Alarm Clock on Inside the News.
Good afternoon, everyone. You are still listening to the special St. Kitts and Nevis election 2020 edition of Inside the News on Win FM. In our last and third segment will be the Deputy Prime Minister, the Honorable Sean Richards, so please stay tuned.
Maybe it's the way the brilliant gold liquid reflects our sunshine, or how the bright blue of its label mirrors the clear Caribbean skies overhead. Maybe it's the fresh, crisp taste of this beastly cold beer on a scorching hot day. Maybe it's even the way it brings us all together. But one thing is for sure, Carib is very much a part of who we are wherever we're from in the Caribbean. Carib, it's the way we play. Drink responsibly.
As social distancing becomes the norm of our everyday life, the Cable wants you, our customer, to know that we are here for you every day. Just log into us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Send us your feedback at email customerservice@thecable.biz. Visit our website www.thecable.net. It's also nice to know you can pay your bills at a distance, online at all commercial banks, or at www.thecable.net/pay. Now's the time to try online banking. It's ultra easy. Call us at 465-2588, 662-7742, or 763-0184. The Cable. We're here for you.
Imagine a place